debater and you're not afraid of a fight. So why have your comments off? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I've turned them on for a lot of things.
On your shorts, you do.
Right. In some of my lives, I think they're on, but almost as soon as I turn them on, there's photos of my family's homes.
Okay.
What's the address?
Yeah.
And at what point, and I just want to clarify,
Yeah, please.
I don't have to take that abuse.
Agreed.
Like, I don't come to work and slap the dick out of their mouth. Like,
kind of why do you have a disdain for informants, in your opinion?
I don't disdain them. I downright fucking hate them. Okay. That's okay. But see, this is why I can say it. That guy's crazy. He's on medication. I have a disdain for them because no man should ever go to prison on the words of another man, number one. Number two, in 90% of the cases you look at, the informant has done more vile and disturbing crap than those that are being accused. Number three, I find it oxymoronic when a man, Joey Merlino, because everybody knows who he is, goes in front of a judge, they can bring up everything he's ever been accused of, including murders and whatever else. Even though he's acquitted, it doesn't really matter because it's a character judgment. But yet, in that same case, you can't turn that around and say, well, let's judge the rat. Judges don't allow that. So for me, it's like you're walking in, you're already behind.
I'm going to tell you something. If you don't ever bother me again, again, the rest of my life, I ain't giving them attention. I can't. There's good friends of mine out there. Well, he's divorced, you have to do it tough. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the money. The most of me is that the boss is your boss.
Welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to get into Paul Castellano for a little while today and probably for the next 2 or 3 weeks. There is a lot about Paul Castellano that I think over the years has sort of been distorted because a lot of people just sort of pick up mob history really just after JohnGotti, does what he does with Paul. And I think people have a tendency to walk past the fact that Paul was a gangster. And nobody's going to argue that Paul, to some extent anyway, was not, let's say, staying home with the rest of the chickens in the coop. Paul really insulated himself from day one. And it wasn't just in as he got older. I mean, this was something that he sort of recognized in Carlo. And this is something he carried forward for a long time. Should have Paul spent more time with the guys on the streets? Yeah, maybe. But what are the ramifications of that? And the truth be told is that Paul did hang out at social clubs. He wasn't a guy that was totally not seen. And so we're going to talk about that today. We're going to go through some of his FBI files, which are incredibly interesting because you're going to find out that Paul was really a lot more wealthy. He didn't need to be the boss of anything. He was already a multimillionaire before he ever took the reins. He didn't need it. And maybe by the end of this, we'll sort of understand a little bit better why Carlo elevated him to the position that he did. And maybe it'll make more sense. It doesn't change some of the negative attributes of Paul Castellano, but it certainly changes sort of what the historical viewpoint has been, at least, albeit on YouTube. I don't know why other content creators have not covered this way. I'm always surprised. There's a litany of information out there about a lot of different people that you can obtain, and I don't know why people don't. I think it's just easier to jump on Wikipedia and read three paragraphs, call it your own, and then call it a day. And just before I jump into this, earlier in this show, I went fucking nuts at the very beginning. That was a couple of days ago. I just gotten home. I was grumpy. Doesn't mean I don't mean what I said. But sometimes, when you get the first opportunity to speak, it's not always the best thing you say. But I don't take anything back. I mean what I said. And I personally, at this point, just don't care what anybody does. I really don't. Unless you're going to, step up and say something to me, then fine. But if you're not, then I got to keep it moving. As far as Nadu and some of the shit that's been coming out of his mouth, I don't care anymore. Let him say whatever. He's a joke. Everybody knows he's a joke. His claim to fame is going to be going on Joey's show now, from what I understand. I think it's funny because I thought Joey didn't deal with nobody that dealt with rats. But yet his wife's a rat. Those are facts. It's amazing the hypocrisy of organized crime. And there's just one other thing I want to address before I jump into this. Because of this email jerk off. You had delusions of grandeur about Joey. You were all up his ass. Listen, I knew Joey a long time. This anger, this rage, this fury at him doesn't come out of nowhere. And so a lot of people just don't understand that. And they think I'm just some guy that comes on the microphone and just says whatever he wants. It doesn't have ramifications. It does. But this idea that I don't know any of these people is just ludicrous to me. And I'm tired of regurgitating it and talking about it. And I'm not going to do that here either. But for idiots who write emails, they should really do some investigating before they start just spewing off. Because that's what they do. They hear a bunch of trolls say one thing, they believe it to be gospel, and then they run with it. And for the life of me, the one thing that I cannot understand, and this is even more imperative today than it was 3 weeks ago for me, is if you're in your mid-40s, early 40s, even if you're in your fucking mid-30s to early 40s, what are you doing on YouTube all day in these awful chats that spew bullshit? Why are you acting like the bully on the playground? This is what you have lived your life to be? It's very sad. It's very sad. So like the old saying goes, when people have accused me of doing things behind the scenes surreptitiously, I always say, why the fuck I need to do it surreptitiously? I've always done things with my own voice, with my own face, with my own name. I don't need to hide. I never have. But a lot of you need to. And I'm going to tell you something. The one thing that I've learned in the last year looking at YouTube is most people that have these fake names and continue to do that are usually pedophiles, digglers, rapists, sexual assaulters, Nazis, child molesters, you name it. They always seem to be the bottom of the barrel. It happens every single time. And so it sort of makes me sit back and say, well, you know what? Haters are going to hate, but the people that are hating like that, they hate me, don't even know me. They just hate me because everybody else does. They have things to hide. And I've seen it. I've seen it happen left and right in the last couple of months. All these people that have so much to say, turns out they're pedophiles, turns out they're this, turns out they're that. Should shock nobody. So keep on hating, keep on spewing your nonsense. But if you're not willing to at least come on my show and debate me, which you never will, none of you will. How many times have we done a live where I drop the link, come in here and say what you want? They never do. Because you're cowards. That's it. All right, so we're going to do a bit of a deep dive here. There's going to be more information next week. Like I said, I'm trying to get back into this slowly. But we're going to do a deep dive on Paul Castellano. And much of what you will hear, some of you might not have heard before. I have all of his FBI files, every single one. And there's a lot of stuff that is redacted, some stuff that isn't. And let me tell you, for anybody who ever thought that Paul was a louse or he was soft, that's not who Paul was. And yeah, we have talked on this show before about Paul, but not to the extent that we're going to in the next couple of weeks. And while Paul was many things at the end of the day, he was still a gangster. Many may speculate he truly didn't deserve to become the boss and that Carlos should not have deferred to Paul. But the reality is that after we get through a lot of these files, despite whatever you may think of Paul and Neil, you might have a better grasp as to why that decision might have been made. History may perhaps argue both sides of that coin. And, we probably will as well. But I think because nobody's ever really done a deep dive like this, perhaps it might sway some of you to say, wow, I didn't think that Paul was like that. It's not probably going to change the end result of the way history or certain people are going to have their narrative of him. It's not going to change the traditionalists' minds, but it might change some of yours. And so what we're going to do here is not an ABC biographical sort of he was born, he was died. I don't like doing those. I've never liked doing it. I've never been a big fan of A to Z. What's important here is the meat and the potatoes of it. And what we're going to do is jump right into the paperwork. And perhaps the one thing worth noting is that the Castellanos were already heavyweights here in New York City when Carlo Gambino arrives in Virginia in December of 21. And we do know from history that Carlo already was a made man in the Mafia back in Sicily. And he belonged to a family in the Passo di Reggiano region of Sicily. And what's interesting about that is the fact that in Sicily, they were considered Movimento, okay? And that is a little off kilter from what we know the Mafia to be. And the Movimento were split in the Passo di Reggiano section. They were split into 3 clans. And the reason why I'm being very specific about how I say this is because a lot of people get confused. Think of this for just a second like Andrangheta. Andrangheta is not one family. They're all little clans. In Italy, there are Sicilian clans as well. And there were 3 clans inside of Passo di Reggiano. And that's in Sicily, outside of Palermo. And Carlo Gambino was inducted into one of those clans, and they were referred to as Movimento. All right? And like I said, there were 3 of these clans, and they competed for dominance in Reggiano. All right? And so, like I said, not to confuse everybody, but think of it like an Andrina clan or Andrangheta. There's 3 major families in this area of Sicily. However, they all have subsets or districts that they run. So 3 big families, each one has a subset, and the other part of the country, the district, and the region. And as we know, the city of Palermo is divided into 8 movimenti, or subsets, 8 clans. Okay, Palermo itself has 8 clans. Those clans are the Porto Nova, the Brancaccio, the Bocca di Falco, the Passo di Reggiano, the Santa Maria di Gesù, which is Jesus, the Noce, the Pagliarelli, the San Lorenzo, and the Rossa Sutanta. Okay, so those are the 8 clans. I'm not going to read them again because I'll get some jerk off who says, oh, you said this one wrong. You said that one wrong. So in the province of Palermo alone, meaning surrounding inside of Palermo, there are 7 movimenti, which include San Giuseppe Giotto, Corleone, Cinisi, Bagheria, Trabia, Belmonte Mazzano, Santamaro Castelverde. What else do we have? Camporeale. I think I'm missing one. Pardonico. Okay, so inside, so this is why it's so crazy. There's 8 clans, and then in just the province of Palermo itself. See, before the city of Palermo, okay, so this is just the city. We gave you the 8 clans, okay? Then in the province of Palermo, just meaning in the city limits, there's 7 other clans, okay? Just to give you sort of an idea. In the province of Agrigento, there are 10 movimenti, 10 clans. There's Santa Elisabetta, Porto Empedocle, Giancati, this is in Nassa, Cianciana, Ribera, Sambuca di Sicilia, Casteltermini, Palma di Montichiaro, and Campobello di Licata. Okay, so we moved to Agrigento, and there are 10 clans there. And Trapani, there's 4. And those are the Castelvetrano, the Trapani, the Mazzara del Volo, and the Alcalmo. Then you go to the province of Caltanissetta, and there are 4 clans, those being the Gela, the Vallelunga, the Pradameno, the Risi, and the Musamelli. So as you can see, it's not one huge operating. They're all Cosa Nostra, but these are all little clans. That's the major difference between the way that American Mafia runs versus the Sicilian Mafia. In the Sicilian Mafia, yes, the Mafia is one big conglomerate, but they have all of these little splinter cells, just like Andrina does, or Andrangheta. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So I bring that up because when Carlo Gambino arrives, he was by all account already a made guy and had taken part in at least 3 murders back in Sicily. And it's also important to note that Carlo likely left, as many others, because there was oversaturation. Too many fucking players in a small area. But it also helps that his cousins, the Castellanos, were already thriving here in New York City. And the move for him just made sense. I mean, Carlo could be a smaller fish in a much bigger pond. And Paul, as we know, his real name actually is Constantino Castellano. And he was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1915. His parents, Giuseppe and Concetta, immigrated from Sicily at some point. But we don't know exactly what the date of that is. But what we do know is that Paul's father, Joe Giuseppe, was a made member in the Mafia. He was in the Morello, Mangano, Lupo crime family, as they were precursors to what we know as the Gambino crime family. He likely worked under the leadership of both Joe Morello and Ignazio Lupo, and then Vincent Mangano. We also know, according to the records, at some point Paul becomes a butcher, but leaves school in the 8th grade to go into the butcher trade. But at the same time he's doing that, he's collecting numbers receipts for his father. And so the first real arrest that we know of comes on July 3rd of 1934, when Paul was just 19 years old in New York City by the NYPD. And the reason why he gets arrested was there was a warrant out of Hartford, Connecticut, and he was charged with assault, robbery, and carrying an illegal firearm. And according to reports, he robbed a haberdashery, and this is what those charges stemmed from. He would be sentenced to a year in prison in Hartford jail on August 12th of 1934. In February of 1936, Paul was arrested by the NYPD for felony assault and malicious mischief for cracking a man in the head with a pipe several times in broad daylight. Castellano was arrested and in March of 36 would be acquitted in a court of special sessions in Brooklyn, New York. In January 38, he would be arrested for vagrancy. In February, those charges would be dropped and Castellano would be discharged by the magistrate. So the first time that we know that the FBI really starts to look at Paul Castellano is a result, really, of the 1957 Appalachian meeting. And by the time of this first data report that we have, Paul would have been 42 years old at that point and already established himself as a meat magnet. That sounds very pornographic. I'm a meat magnet. So according to the FBI report that is dated on December 24th, 57, it reflects that Castellano was living at 1737 East 23rd Street in Brooklyn, New York, and was president of the MC Meat Market Incorporated, located off of Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. According to the FBI, he managed several other locations. These locations were off Lefferts Boulevard in Brooklyn, 2 off Myrtle Avenue in Brooklyn, and 1 location in Ozone Park in Queens, and an additional location in Queens off Richmond Hill. In total, he had 10 locations. And from what the intelligence from the report by the FBI states is that multiple informants have been supplying information about Paul Castellano since or about 1949. So once again, to no shock to anybody, the informants were already talking. But the FBI really doesn't begin to pay attention to him, like I said, until 1957 after the Appalachian meeting. 5 informants, however, were furnishing information about Paul, and the dates of these informants, known as T1 through T5, furnished the following information specific to this report on December 5th of 57. T1 through 3 and T4 on December 3rd of 57 and T5 December 3rd of 57. After initial information was received, the FBI did a records check for Paul Castellano at the DMV and Immigration Services, and nothing was found negative for Paul Castellano. On December 10th of 57, a 6th informant known as T6 sat down with the FBI. The informant provided information that Paul Castellano's parents had immigrated from Palermo, Sicily, and provided information on Castellano's birth date and place of birth. The informant also provided the address for Castellano and his wife and children and explained that Castellano had lived there since 1948 or 49. The informant would also explain that Carlo Gambino, who was the newly elected boss of the Gambino crime family, was Paul's cousin and brother-in-law, and they both operated illegal businesses in Brooklyn, New York. A 7th informant came forward and told the FBI that basically what Paul was driving, the plate numbers, and where they could be seen. The seventh informant, known as T7, explained that while Paul had completed a butcher's apprenticeship, he had claimed $8,000 a year in salary, and he was, in fact, involved in the organized crime rackets. An eighth informant, known as T8, had furnished all home addresses for the Castellano family, as well as the business addresses of Paul Castellano, and explained that most of his businesses were, in fact, simple fronts. A ninth informant, known as T9, comes forward on December 13th of 57 and corrects FBI agents on Paul Castellano's birthday and age. He further backed up informants T3 through 6 in regards to the location of his businesses. A 10th informant would come forward, known as T10, furnishing non-corroborative information against Paul dated in June of 42. An 11th informant, known as T11, form dated December 9th of 57, provided information regarding the following. A 1956 two-tone tan Pontiac bearing the license plate number AK4703 was registered to Paul Castellano. The car was registered to 1737 East 23rd Street, Brooklyn, New York, and the informant stated that he saw the car and Paul Castellano at the Torre Grossa funeral home parking lot. He informed the FBI that Paul was attending a wake of Joseph Eneroso. He further provided that Paul also drove a 1953 green Cadillac and provided the plate numbers as well. He provided this information contingent on seeing Paul at an opposite wake of Joe Anastasio. Let's see, December 10th of 1956, informant T6 came in and identified Carlo Gambino as the boss of the Gambino crime family and advised special agents that Paul Castellano was Carlo's cousin and his brother-in-law, and that Carlo married Paul's sister and has in the past had heart issues. The informant explained that Carlo had told him that he and Paul went to the upstate home of Joe Barbara in Appalachian because he had recently had heart surgery, and Carlo wanted to inquire as to the surgery and the results because he was considering the same alternative surgery. Castellano would explain to informant number T6 that he borrowed a car from a friend, a Lincoln, and drove Carlo, Tom, and Mike and himself to Appalachian. Tom would have been Armand Tommy Rava from the Gambino crime family, Mike Miranda from the Genovese crime family. After the raid on Appalachian, as Castellano was arrested, the only identification he had was a business card for Allied Retail Butchers Association with the word president and Castellano's name under it. As Castellano was questioned 43 times, he would invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. As the FBI began to look more into the holdings of Paul Castellano, they found over a dozen stores, each with $1,000 in merchandise and fixtures and equipment totaling over $8,000 per store. Now, keep in mind, this is in 1956, the date of this report. That's $108,000 in 1956. And if we look at how much that was back in 56, it's fucking staggering. That's about $1.3 million in today's money. So Paul already, before he was really, who we know him to be, was already very wealthy. In 56, the FBI makes a report that Paul Castellano is president of the MC Meat Market. Named treasurer is Thomas Masato, who was also named treasurer of his other businesses. And what is interesting about this is what we know about Masato is he was a hitman for Carlo Gambino. And he committed several murders at the behest of Carlo and was also cousins of the Gambinos and the Castellanos as well. And if you remember, we talked about Masato, and at one point he was running out of New Jersey and had established himself as a union earner out there, among other things, and then returns back to New York after Carlo takes over. But this report backs that up. But this is also the first time Masato was ever mentioned in an FBI report that puts him with the Gambinos and specifically Paul. In 1957, as we know, the feds begin to look at Paul's legit businesses and claimed, this is where it gets really interesting. They begin to look at his legitimate businesses, and they claimed that they were worth an estimated $270,000. He raked in over $100,000 a year. Now, if we translate that to today's money, we're looking at $3 million, and $100K was about 1.1. So we're looking at about $4.1 million. That's a shitload of money in 1957. In late 1957, another informant known as T13, 13th informant, comes forward. And we know that T13 and now T14, another informant, 14th informant, start providing information from banking institutions because what they were able to do was get copies of Paul's loan applications in 2 banks in New York City area. One at the Manufacturers Trust Company on November 29th of 57, and another one at First National City Bank of New York on January 11th of 57. And the information detailed in those reports is really vast. And so I'm going to kind of summarize it. And this is just going to show you the scheming that Paul had going on. Paul would apply for a loan for $3,000 on January 5th of 56. He listed one of his meat distribution locations as collateral and estimated it to be worth $25,000. Also on the loan, it shows he has a mortgage on his home to the sum of $4,000. And the reason for the loan application was to purchase a 1956 DeSoto sedan. Also noted was that he was reimbursing his company, for the purchase of the car. Further investigation shows that Paul was depositing $20,000 a day into his bank account. So what the fuck's he need a loan for? The secondary loan application was stated use for property upgrades. It's dated November 26th of 57. He used the government's Title I Housing Act and applied for a $5,000 loan for upgrades on his home in Brooklyn. As collateral, he offers up his MC Meat Market as well, stated that he was the owner and operator for 20 years. He claimed on his loan, interestingly, that he only made $10,000 a year at this store. And see, what Paul was basically doing was money laundering like a pro. This is what he's doing. He was using bank loans to appear like everything's on the up and up. He didn't need the money. He had it. He just didn't want to provide his own money because it looked sort of suspicious. And the fact that he could have legitimately pulled out of his pocket, but he took the extra steps to give everything the look of that it was on the up and up tells you a lot about him. He claimed under this loan that his assets totaled $132,000 and his liabilities were in the amount of $21,000. His income receipts showed that the business net as being $650,000. This, you guys are going to lose it when I tell you this. He claimed that his total net that he was making as a part of all these businesses was $650,000, but that his employees' salaries came to $640,000, only leaving him with $10,000 a month or a year. You believe that? I'm sitting here looking at all this paperwork and I see his signature and all this stuff. Like, nobody from the government said, wait a minute here, the math just doesn't add up. But if you think about it, he pulls in $650K a year, right? And he's paying legitimately 90% of that profit into salaries. Like, do you guys see where I'm going with this? It's like business 101. If 90% of your gross goes into salaries, you're a shit businessman. You don't know what you're doing. And for the record, $650,000 in 1957 is $7.3 million. So of that $7.3 million, he's paying 7.2 in salaries? Are you kidding me? Like, you got to be kidding me, right? It just shows you how sort of business savvy he was. So, on December 15th of 57, another informant known as T16, so now we have a 16th informant, provided intelligence that Paul Castellano acquired a loan for the amount of $27,445 back in February of 57 and was repaying that loan at $762.50 a month for 30 months. Once again, he claimed a different amount of money income-wise. This time he was only making $85,000 a year. And we're not going to keep going over. I've got like 70 different loan applications here. We're not going to keep going over it, but nobody caught on to this. Like, I wouldn't call myself an auditor, but it didn't take me but 3 seconds to see what he was doing. So he has millions and millions of dollars going back and forth every day, loans every other month, and nobody sort of sees what's going on here. The entire reason why I explained any of this is to show you the amount of money that Paul Castellano was already pulling in by age 40. So many people think that he was just some legit wannabe guy and just looking at the numbers. I'm going to tell you something. I think he's second to Tony Salerno. I legitimately now believe that he was second to Tony Salerno. We know that Tony Salerno was pulling in $1 billion a year. It's staggering. And this is legit income, some of it anyway. We don't know how much of it actually is. And the FBI would begin surveillance on Castellano at his home. They also found records to indicate that he was a longshoreman on Pier 64 on the North River working for John T. Clark and Son Stevedore and Company. So how can you own all of these stores and also at the same time be a fucking longshoreman on Pier 64? How is that? How many hours in a fucking day does one have? And it's simple. It's a no-show job. However, we know why he was there. Paul was a busy guy. However, notated in that specific report is that Paul Castellano, was known as a loan shark on the pier. The Castellano brothers were known as the two men on the docks loaning out money to workers and to companies who were behind on payroll checks. And it appears as if, looking through all of these files that we have, that the FBI was not on to Paul until, like I said, after Appalachian. And it was after that that they began a huge case file on Paul Castellano. And so if you want some details of that first arrest, this is classic. I was able to sort of get the arrest sheet and all of the facts and see exactly what it was. It's actually kind of funny. I apologize for yawning. I really do. All right. So on July 2nd of 1934, a tailor at a haberdashery, whose name was redacted, was held up by two men. They took him at gunpoint and locked him in the bathroom. They took his wallet and they stole $51 from his pocket. Shortly before the robbery, a witness saw a car parked down the street with New York plates. That witness said that he saw one of the men grab a revolver from the glove box. How the fuck can you see anybody grab a gun from the glove box? Like, legit, really. That's, to me, this is bullshit. That part of it's bullshit. But the witness would explain that he saw the two men exit the car and enter the haberdashery. The plate number was copied down by the witness, and it leads directly back to Paul Castellano. And when the NYPD arrests Paul Castellano, they arrested him in the same fucking car. And when they looked in the glove box, they come across the same goddamn gun as described by the witness. Castellano immediately admits to owning the gun, and he flat out admits to robbing the store. But he explained that he could not describe or identify the other two men who might have been with him because they were hitchhikers he picked up on the side of the road near Bridgeport, Connecticut. Classic. So the FBI ran a records check of the phone calls in relation to Castellano's business's address, and those calls really don't help him either. And it showed various calls to Carlo Gambino, Armand Rava, and dozens of others, but the one call in connection was with Jimmy LaDuca, alleged Buffalo, New York hoodlum. That phone record was connected to F&J Auto Body and Fender Repairs in the Bronx, and F&J was owned by Frank Castellano and Jimmy LaDuca. And moving right along, after Appalachian and the informants began to spill sort of into overdrive, an informant known as TE-T4 explained to the FBI that Joe Profaci was the top hoodlum among the Sicilians, and that there were three Sicilian combinations in operation in Brooklyn at the time. One group was led by Johnny Otto, another known as Chief Bonacera, and Paul Castellano. So what's interesting about this is, and when I say three combinations, crews, that's what we're talking about, crews. And it's odd that the informant explains that of all the Sicilians operating in Brooklyn, Joe Profaci was at the top, but that the other three that were going on, one was led by Paul Castellano. That's interesting to me. It's very interesting to me. And this information was taken on December 3rd through the 7th of 1957. It also stated that all of these leaders were responsible to report to Joe Profaci. Now, we know that not to be true. Because Paul Castellano is not with Joe Profaci. It just goes to show that informants sometimes know bits and pieces, but they don't know the totality of what they're talking about. You know what I mean? So moving right along, after Appalachian and the informants began to still continue to come out of the fucking woodwork, the informant also included information about a heist that Paul Castellano had put together. According to the informant, the heist was pulled off well, but that the intelligence was bad, and there was not as much money as they thought. The informant claimed that Paul Castellano was irate, but said that in the future they would plan better and hand the job to people who had more knowledge of the situation. The FBI would find out in 1948 that the Bureau of Narcotics was investigating Paul Castellano, who was seen at the Roma Tavern. The tavern was the meeting spot for narcotics traffickers in New York City, and Paul was caught, based on reports and phone records, making calls to Carlo Gambino from that tavern. As well, but probably more important, were the calls that he made to Jimmy DeLuca in the Bronx, as Castellano apparently left a message for DeLuca to call him back at the Roma Tavern. Also noted were calls to Paul Gambino and Frank Castellano. Based on more investigating, it was found that Carmela Castellano, Paul's aunt, who on paper was partners with Paul's dad in the meat distribution companies, was basically merely a front, that Carlo's brother Paul Gambino was the secret operator of that. But that was also used for a front for Paul. So he was every meat distribution he had 3 fronts running it. So to get to him was almost an impossibility. He was on the list, but he's way down on the list. But he had 9 or 10 people as front operators for all of this. And it was just easier for him to hide illicit money for the purposes of taxes. In this file, it also shows that Paul had multiple conversations with police. This is where, well, especially he had a lot of conversations with a guy by the name of with a specific lieutenant whose name was redacted. This lieutenant explained to the FBI that he and Paul talked all the time, almost weekly. And he had interviewed him a dozen times in the past, and it's according to this lieutenant that Castellano does in fact control the rackets in Brooklyn, but any time the two speak, Paul would become evasive and refuse to give any information concerning crime with the lieutenant, and they mainly spoke about common things. The lieutenant specifically stated that unlike other racketeers, Paul stays at home and spends time with his family. He doesn't consort in bars with women or associates. And so you can see from day one, Paul Castellano's aloof. He's smart. He kept to himself. He didn't want to be seen with people, didn't want to engage in public. So now all those alleged, John Gotti gripes about Paul never coming around, it served a purpose. He had insulated himself even back in the 40s. And you can see that the FBI was onto him even back then. And they knew, and the fact that they knew this kind of stuff blows my mind a bit. But as we always say, back in those days of the FBI, it was more about obtaining information and information consolidation more than it was anything else. Think of what they knew, how much they knew. And it was all handed over by informants. And you wonder why Paul laid low his entire life, and yet they still got dirt on him. By 1958, a year after the file was opened, the FBI would complete a list of legit enterprises that Castellano owned. They found that he owned 90, not 9, not 3, 90 meat markets in Brooklyn alone. The next 3 informants pretty much tripled down on everything that had been told the FBI, explaining that Paul stays at home, doesn't vacation, doesn't buy anything expensive. The FBI would conduct physical surveillance between February 10th through the 14th of 58 and found that Paul went to work and went home. That was it. No visitors, no late night meetings, no nothing. Once Paul returned home, he was in for the night. They did note that Paul did wear expensive suits. In 1956, they did more physical surveillance on Paul Castellano. On February 10th of 56, the FBI staked out Paul's home, and here's the report verbatim. At 9:45 a.m., then from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., physical surveillance was taken outside of the subject's home. No activity to report. At 10:45, another unit surveilled his business address located at 140 Fort Greene in Brooklyn, New York. The subject's car, a 1957 white Buick convertible with a blue canvas tarp, was observed in the parking lot of said business. Physical eyes on the subject did not happen. At 7:27 p.m., subject's other car, green 1956 DeSoto, was spotted parked in the driveway. Another car parked in the rear of the home by the garage was spotted. Castellano's car was not seen. So the reason why I'm going to stop there is there's a bunch of more surveillance reports, and it's a lot of some of these surveillance reports are all the same, and I don't want to go through read you guys 10 different surveillance reports that are the same. But what you're going to start to see is Paul Castellano really begins to morph into a boss. And I know this is like a lot of information to take in at one time, but the reason why I wanted to do it this way was to show you the depths that the FBI goes and to show you the depths that Paul Castellano went to keep himself insulated. Paul was not a joke. Paul was not a non-gangster. What Paul ends up becoming is the antithesis of what he always was anyway. And these files are over 800 pages in length, okay? And it's impossible to go through 800 pages. This is like the summation from 250 pages. And, you know, what I'm doing is I'm pulling out larger portions of the FBI intel because I want to show you what they knew. And it sort of gives, it's not to say that everything informants have to, you know, tell the FBI is accurate. And when they're not being accurate, I tell you so because we know better. But it's interesting that Paul Castellano had 14, 16, some fucking informants giving up information on him since the 1940s. Like, that's ridiculous. But at the time, because a lot of people might say, well, why didn't the FBI go after him? Because at the time, the FBI was just collecting information. They weren't about prosecuting. They were about just obtaining information. But we're gonna keep doing this next week, and I think it's a very unique look into Paul Castellano, and I think it shows you a side of him. 90 fucking stores. What the fuck did he need to be a boss for? He was already a multimillionaire by 1947. By 1947, he had all he needed to have. Over on our YouTube community page the other day, I posted a picture of his first home. It's humongous. It's not the monstrosity that he would buy 2 decades later, but it was still a fucking monstrosity for the fucking time. This is a guy who didn't need to fucking be a boss. He didn't need to be a boss. But I think you can start to see, at least in a small way maybe, why Carlo ends up picking him. Yes, it's family. Yes, it's bloodlines, and that's what Carlo believed in. But Paul is very business-oriented, and this is what gangsterism is. It's being a part of business. And yes, we can make the argument Paul kind of forgot who he was. I don't think Paul really did. I don't think Paul forgot who he was. I think Paul just reached a level where he felt he was above a lot of people. That was his mistake. His mistake was not having respect for the guys coming up in the gutters doing all the work like he did in his 20s. It seems like it's almost like I paid my fucking dues. What the fuck do I care about them? I already paid my dues. That's the kind of attitude I think Paul had. And that's the kind of attitude that gets a motherfucker killed in the end. But it's amazing to me when you look at just the numbers, some of the stores' numbers we read. We say it all the time. A lot of these gangsters that we talk about on this show, historically, they don't need to be gangsters. They could have been anything they wanted. But the truth of the matter is they got to be gangsters to get their foot in the door. And that's the trick. But I think Paul could rival Tony Salerno. I really do. And just the amount of money. And the money that Paul's bringing in isn't even... We're talking some legitimate shit. 90 stores, yes, they were fronts, so we can't be 100% sure on how much was legitimate business and how much was illicit, but because he was washing the money through the stores. But still, my God, what the hell do you need to be the boss of anything for? And here's the other thing, and we'll get into this in the next couple of weeks. If you think that Paul wasn't a killer, you're nuts. You're nuts. I had a conversation with an attorney the other day who may or may not have known Paul Castellano very well. And he said, if you think for 1 second that Roy DeMeo was a butcher, you have no idea who Paul Castellano truly was. And with that, we're going to leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad to be back. Thank you for putting up with my yawning. It was a struggle to get through it, but we're going to get better each and every week. We will see everybody here next week, same bat time, same bat channel.